Hi everyone! This is the first video in a multi-part series where we'll be making clothing for my newest doll, Gil of the Fisherfolk. If you're interested in seeing the sculpting and assembly process for Gil and other projects I've worked on, head over to my Patreon for behind-the-scenes photos and videos. It's free to join. I'd love to see you there. To begin, I like to create a color palette and choose fabrics for the character. Blue, brown, and khaki for this one. Using up scraps and recycling old clothing is one of my favorite parts of making doll clothes. To create the shirt, I'm using a technique called draping to pin the fabric directly to the body. This is a fast and simple way to get the right shape and fit. It works best if you're using a stretchy fabric like jersey. Start by pinning the shoulders, making sure to smooth the fabric as you go. The grain of the fabric should be straight up and down at the center of the body. It's easy to see it here on this fabric because of the detail lines. You'll want to remove the excess fabric when it becomes difficult to pin. Make sure you include a bit of extra length and width for sewing the seams together later. Tailor's chalk or a disappearing ink pen would be helpful to sketch out your lines before cutting. A 1/4 inch or less should be sufficient. And here we are with the front body. I clipped the fabric away to create a rounded armhole and followed the side of his body to create the side seam. The sleeves will be added separately using a paper pattern. I don't usually drape the sleeves because it can be difficult to be accurate. To create the back pattern, I'm using the front as a guide. I press it up to the back and check the fit. It looks good, except the neck is too wide. I'll pin that excess out and trace that piece onto fabric to create the back. Here are the front and back pieces. I'm lining up the shoulders because this will be the first seam I'll be sewing. Here is the pattern for the sleeve. Notice the shape of the cap, the top part of the pattern. Ensure the length matches the length of the arm from the garment shoulder to the wrist. Also make sure the widths of the wrist and bicep match your doll's needs. Sleeves can be confusing. I will create a helpful cheat sheet for creating custom sleeves and have it available in my Patreon. Start by sandwiching the right sides together. Pin the shoulder, then either hand sew a straight stitch or use a sewing machine. I often prefer to hand stitch when the seams are so small. After you've knotted and clipped the thread, check the seam to make sure it is straight and not coming apart. If you see holes, that means your stitches are too far apart. Now it's time to add the sleeve. I'm folding the sleeve in half in order to find the center of the cap. That center point will match up to my shoulder seam. Now I can pin and straight stitch this along the armhole. Now I'll put the shirt back on the doll. I'll do the majority of the stitching while the shirt is on the doll. That way I can make a tight fit without worrying about leaving openings that are big enough for his head or hands. If you want clothing that is removable, you will need to put in extra thought to closures, such as buttons or zippers. The sleeve is taking shape. I'm going to stitch the sleeve seam at the underarm from his wrist to hip. Then I will sew his other shoulder, attach the other sleeve, and sew that side seam, all while the shirt is on him. This part can get tedious. It is helpful if your doll is posable, so you can shift the arms up or down as necessary. This stitch is called the ladder stitch or invisible stitch. I take the needle and put it down on one side, then across on the other side, pulling it tight to hide the stitch in the seam. If you do a Google search, you can easily find some images showing how to do this stitch. Once you get the hang of it, it can be used for most of the seams in your project. Here it is, the completed shirt. I think it came out pretty good. I left the bottom edge raw because it's going to be tucked beneath his pants. Stay tuned for the next part in this series, where we'll be sewing Gil's pants. Hope to see you there.